St. Paul outside the wall is one of the four major basilicas of the city, along with St. Peter's and St. John Lateran and Santa Maria Maggiore. It's a reconstruction after a 19th century fire. The interior shows the fine shape of a Roman basilica. The apse and the nave are very impressive architectural monuments, and there's a lot of artworks inside. The cloisters were built in the 13th century, and this is the original, still standing. A quiet meditative garden. The convent and the monks would have lived all around the cloister. The great variety of spiral columns form a perfect frame for this monument. Each one is different, encrusted with a mosaic of gold and colored marble stones. There's a very nice gift shop here as part of St. Paul's where you can purchase some jewelry, some Benedictine, the liqueur of the monks. Back on the bus, we're continuing our tour of the city, passing the oldest bridge, Ponte Fabricio, crossing the Tiber River with a view of Hadrian's Mausoleum. Yes, this is another great structure in the city. Entering the Vatican Museum, the most important museum in Rome, the most important museum in Italy. The impressive spiral staircase of the popes leads you in. Be sure to take a look down when you get to the top of that staircase. Through the ticket booth, grab a nice lunch in the Vatican cafeteria, and now it will be my great pleasure to lead you on a walking tour of the Vatican Museum. Now, the first thing we'll see is the Egyptian collection, and then we'll have a look at a beautiful outdoor courtyard with several important sculptures, the Belvedere courtyard, and then we're going to walk through a long map gallery. We'll see some tapestries, and then we're going to go through the Raphael stanza, which are beautiful rooms painted by Raphael, frescoes on the wall. The structure began life as a palace. It was the home of the popes. And it wasn't until the year 1503 that the first artworks were set up for the public to look at, and that was under Pope Julius II, 1503. Julius II was a very important pope for the arts because he was the great man of the Renaissance who hired Michelangelo, hired Raphael, and had all of these great, he had the Church of St. Peter's built, and he funneled a lot of the money of the church into those artworks. He was a great benefactor and patron of the arts. So we're going to go up the stairs and through and up into the Egyptian collection for starters. Up this way. You know, the Egyptian culture was thriving 5,000 years ago. They had really the first high civilization in the Western world, or anywhere in the world for that matter. And in this room, it's a pretty good reproduction of what an Egyptian temple actually looks like. This is the typical column and the capital that the Egyptians invented on their own, and the kind of flat beam construction. And then these panel fragments are from the outside walls and inside walls of temples. And these are all real things. There's some incredible mummies in the glass cases just ahead. So let's go look at those. At a real mummy, this is the preserved skin. They had a special mummification process where they would empty out the body cavity and dry it out with salts and special salts and herbs, and then wrap it in the gauze. And it is preserved for thousands of years. And the intestines were put in these canopic jars, and the heart and the liver and so on, the internal organs, were stored in the canopic jars, and that was buried with them in the same tomb. A good example of the typical Egyptian statue. You see that style of 1 foot slightly in front of the other, and yet a very rigid pose. They maintained this artistic style for nearly 3,000 years. This influenced the early Greek statues. They're called the kurai. And dating back to about the year 600 BC in Greece, this dates back earlier. This goes way beyond 1000 BC. But the early Greeks visited Egypt, and they were influenced by what they saw there because it was well beyond their own level of civilization. And they learned from it, and they copied the style, and it became the kurai. And then Greece took it much further a few hundred years later with the classical Greek statues that really came to life with motion and angles and action. And we'll see some Roman copies. We'll see Roman copies later on of the Greek statues just ahead, about 4 rooms ahead.
But what we're going to do now is walk through several more galleries of these kinds of statues. And there's some little ones as well. And so this is examples of just decorative Roman statues. Upstairs, we're going to walk through a gallery that's filled with this kind of statue. We're going to go out on the open courtyard, too. And then that's what the Renaissance was all about, was the rediscovery of this sense of perspective and realistic paintings. So the walls even tell a story here. And this is called Bramante's staircase. Bramante was one of the very important architects of the Renaissance. In fact, Bramante is the main architect of St. Peter's, as well as some other important churches and palaces in Rome, and this staircase. He designed the staircase so that horses could ride with their riders into the palace. So this is like a driveway. It's like a parking garage today where you go up and around and around and around and around. This is the first drive-in palace.
One-way traffic. It's also, like she was saying, the first handicap.
Yeah, right, handicapped accessible. And look at this herringbone pattern of bricks here. It's just marvelous. Bramante is the main architect of St. Peter's, as well as some other important churches and palaces in Rome, and this staircase. He designed the staircase so that horses could ride with their riders into the palace. So this is like a driveway. It's like a parking garage today where you go up and around and around and around and around. This is the first drive-in palace.
One-way traffic. It's also, like she was saying, the first handicap.
Yeah, right, handicapped accessible. And look at this herringbone pattern of bricks here. It's just marvelous. It's also a breezy place, too. I'd have to say that this is my favorite sculpture in the entire museum. And let me tell you why. It's called the Laocoon, and this is an ancient Greek statue. It looks very modern, it looks very realistic, but this dates back to probably about 2,000 years ago. And the sculptors are known, they were from Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, which was part of the Greek civilization. And the interesting aspect of the statue is that it was dug up in the ground here in Rome because it was carved, probably carved in Italy by Greek sculptors. And it was excavated over by the Colosseum, and they found it in 1506 in the ground. And the Renaissance artist Michelangelo was called over to the excavation site to look at it. And the Renaissance artists were astonished. They had never seen a Greek sculpture that was quite as amazing as this one because of the energy, the action, the intensity, the ferocity. What we're looking at is the priest Laocoon and his two sons being crushed by serpents. They're being killed because Laocoon was warning the Trojans against accepting the Trojan horse. It's a historical, mythological scenario. Laocoon was telling the people of Troy, do not let that horse into the city. And the gods on the other side just smote him down. They had serpents come up out of the sea and kill him because Laocoon was trying to defy the gods. And that's the little nutshell story. But you see this agony and this torment and this realism. And when Michelangelo saw this, it very much influenced his own arts. And even in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, when we get to the Sistine Chapel, you'll see some of this kinds of motion and angular rhythms of the body, all from 2,000 years ago. Fabulous piece. Now the other corner's open. Let's let this group get in, and we'll go over to the other corner and see the Apollo Belvedere. So now we're looking at the Apollo Belvedere. And this is a Roman copy of an ancient Greek statue. So this piece itself is almost 2,000 years old. And what we're looking at is the god Apollo, and he was about to launch an arrow. The missing hands would have had a bow in one hand, and he was just releasing the arrow, and he's looking in that direction of his target. But look at the face. What a beautiful face. The noble nose and the position of the body. It's a contrapposto position where most of the weight is on one leg, and there's really dynamic action there associated with it. Totally unlike the earlier, that Egyptian statue that was just static and not going anywhere. This is a marble that's come to life. It's breathing. You can see the tone of the muscles. Now, when we get to Florence, we'll see the David by Michelangelo, which takes this concept even further. But this was a big step in that direction of realism and lifelike reality. And the folds of the drapery, too, looks like cloth rather than marble, as you can see in some of these friezes on the wall over here as well. So these are the two main statues of the Belvedere courtyard. There's another one, there's an Hermes over here. Okay, so let's just swing on by, have a quick look at Hermes. Hermes, he's the messenger god. Mercury was the corresponding god, Hermes. There's a couple of statues by Canova in this corner that are worth a quick look. Canova was an Italian sculptor of the 18th century. We have Perseus holding the head of Medusa, Medusa with the head of snakes. Canova was put in charge and created the design for this overall courtyard back in the 18th century. So since he was curator, he put a couple of his own statues in here at the same time. And along the right side are some burial monuments of the ancient Romans, burial tombs, crypts. Look, let's just walk around briefly around the courtyard, and then we're going to exit through that door over on that side. The centerpiece of this room is the Belvedere Torso. This is another one of the classical marbles, a Greek statue from 2,000 years ago. And this too was dug up out of the ground during the early Renaissance, and Michelangelo was just astonished by it. He says, "I am a student of the torso." Sure, it's a broken statue. There's a lot of broken statues in here, but there's enough left of it to show that the muscular body, the details of the ribs and the strong back, and it's got quite a ceiling over it, hovering up there. You see those black and white paintings, they look like real statues, don't they? That kind of a 3D pop-out.
We continue along to an interesting round room with a dome on top.
It's an homage to the Pantheon. It has the barrel-shaped and the lower half of it, and the hemisphere in the upper half of it. And we have the coffered dome, which is very much like what the Pantheon is. The Pantheon itself is about 3 times bigger than this space. But this gives you some feeling for what the interior of the Pantheon would look like. There's a few interesting statues in here. The bronze with the gold covering here is Hercules. You can tell from the big muscular body, and you can also tell because his 2 symbols are there. There's the lion skin on his left arm and his club in his right hand. How about this punch bowl in the middle of the room?
Yeah.
This too is another ancient piece. It's 2,000 years old, and this was found at the house of Nero. The golden house of Nero, the Emperor Nero, who was the most decadent and crazed of all the emperors. He built himself a palace that was bigger than Versailles, 2,000 rooms, and he had incredible party rooms in there, and this would have been a punch bowl. Into this next room, you see the big marble-colored sarcophagus.
Yeah.
This is the sarcophagus of Constantine's mother. Now, Constantine, we know, was extremely important to the history of the church because he legalized the church. But I believe his mother had a big influence on him in encouraging him because she converted before he did, apparently, right? And so she really encouraged him. So that's her. She's not in there, but she was. That is her sarcophagus. Some of the Roman mosaics were taken out of the Caracalla bathhouse and placed here into the Vatican Museum. And now we're going to walk up and along a gallery of the maps. So on the left, we have one side of Italy, and on the right, another side of Italy that's divided by the Apennine Mountains that run down the middle of it. And there's some town plans in there. You'll see at the very end, there's a painting of Venice at the exit doorway as we pass out of there. But just enjoy the ceiling. It's filled with actual 3-dimensional stucco work and painted panels in between the stucco. So we'll walk all the way through, and we'll meet at the end of the tapestry galleries.
Many bus tour groups just skip through the Vatican Museum in their rush to the Sistine Chapel, but you can see there are many other things to admire in the museum.
Pretty elaborately decorated room, huh? Looks like wallpaper, but of course these are paintings, obviously. It's called the Hall of Constantine, and what we have depicted behind me is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And this was a key turning point in the history of Christianity because it was at this battle that Constantine was converted. Until then, until that moment, he was still resisting, but during the battle, there was the apparition of the true cross, which is depicted over on this wall. This is in the heat of the battle of the Milvian Bridge. And once the true cross appeared, then the tide of the battle turned. He was fighting Maxentius for control of the Roman Empire. And with that, with the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reigned supreme, won the battle, and then decided that Christianity wasn't such a bad thing after all. And that led to the Edict of Milan in the year 313, which legalized the religion. So this is a style of art that's called mannerism. It's in the manner of Michelangelo, and this is a real masterpiece by Raphael. All of these paintings now are by Raphael. And the School of Athens summarizes a lot of different types of philosophy from the classical age. If you were going to have any two great philosophers to be your centerpiece of your painting, who would you want to have? Maybe Plato and Aristotle. So that's who we have in the middle. Plato with his hand reaching up, because he was the philosopher of the ideal world, the ideals, the forms. Aristotle, always looking down to earth, the scientist, the practical-minded man, and the two of them engaging in some dialectic here, in some discussion. Plato has the face of Leonardo da Vinci, courtesy of Raphael, and Michelangelo is also in here, right front and center. They were both painting at the same time now. These stanzas were being created while the Sistine Chapel ceiling was being created. They were great artistic rivals, didn't get along real well, but respected each other tremendously. And at the last moment, Raphael decided to pay homage to Michelangelo by putting him in here as a pensive philosopher. And then behind you we have, just quickly, heaven and earth. Christ, the Father, and then the doctors of earth, a summation of all the world's knowledge in one room.
And then we come to the Sistine Chapel itself, probably the most incredible painting ever created by mankind. And it was all done single-handedly by Michelangelo. It took him nearly 4 years to paint the ceiling, and then he came back later in life to do the Last Judgment. The ceiling is a huge area, 660 square feet, with 9 main central panels that depict the creation and Adam and Eve and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark, summarizing the biblical history of mankind. Of course, you have to be there in person to fully appreciate it. Exiting through a secret little back door of the Sistine Chapel brings us down through Bernini's staircase that leads right into St. Peter's Basilica. Another place you've got to see in person.
This is the largest church in the world, St. Peter's. It was built over a several hundred-year period. All of the artists in Rome during the 1500s, basically, were involved one way or the other in creating this church. Among them in particular were Bramante, who designed that original floor plan, which originally was in the Greek cross plan, and it has since been extended by other later architects, Moderno, into the long nave. See, this is the Latin cross, where the nave is very long. Originally, the church only came as far as that arch because it was the Greek cross plan. But then with Bernini working with Moderno, they managed to extend the church and make it look like it had been originally designed to be this way. The original St. Peter's came just to there, and then that was the facade. That was the outside wall of the church. That was Bramante's original plan, 1510, 1520. But by the early 1600s, Moderno was commissioned to add this entire front wing, and Bernini worked with them to integrate the two and stitch it together with those arches. It was quite an add-on, and it created all of this extra space for people to use. You can fit something like 50,000 people in here standing up for a service. I've told you a lot about Bernini already. He came in quite a bit later, after the main structure was finished and the architecture was pretty much in place, but he is responsible for a lot of these angels and the putti along the sides, and you can see how huge even those little putti are. They're over life size, and again, they help to shrink down this overwhelming scale of the building. And let's start by going over to the Pietà, carved by Michelangelo at a very young age. He was only about 23 years old. He was living in Florence at the time and had become a pretty famous local artist in Florence, enough so that he was invited to Rome and was given the opportunity to carve the Pietà, which he did. He worked on it for nearly a year, and when it was unveiled in Rome, the people were astonished at how perfect and how beautiful the sculpture was. The bronze statue by Arnolfo da Cambio that our guide mentioned this morning is over here. It's the 1200s it was created. This is one of my favorite views anywhere in the world. Just looking up the Baldacchino, that's the name of this bronze canopy, up to Michelangelo's dome. The Baldacchino was created by Bernini from bronze that was stripped from the Pantheon. When we were at the Pantheon, I pointed out over the porch, the portico, all of that bronze was removed on the orders of the Pope and given to Bernini to create this incredible bronze canopy. This stands 9 stories tall. It's 90 feet high, but it doesn't look that high, does it? No, the Baldacchino is 90 feet high, but because the church around it is so huge, you'd never believe it's the height of a 9-story building. But it really is. When you look at the height of somebody standing next to it, you begin to see. The real high altar is under the Baldacchino, and this is reserved for the Pope. And so on Christmas and New Year's and Easter, when you see the Pope on television at the altar, it's under the Baldacchino. The dome itself is 2 shells, inner shell and outer shell. We're looking at the inner shell, and when you walk up it, you walk between the 2 shells. There's a spiral staircase that takes you up all the way to what's called the lantern, and then you're at the highest point in Rome, and you can see all around 360 degrees all over the whole city. The 2 domes are for the structural strength and then the appearance of it all. You see the people up inside the dome? Well, they're walking around up there. That's one of the rewards you get if you walk all the way up to the top. Now that we have 4 important statues in what are called the piers. You see these massive columns? These are what are holding up the dome. They're called piers. And these 4 statues were designed by Bernini as well. He only actually carved one of them, the statue over here of Saint Longinus. Longinus was the soldier who speared Christ and then was forgiven, right? He was the first convert. So we're going to go a little bit further up towards the front now, and we're going to look at the high altar. This entire bronze ensemble is by Bernini, and it's called the Throne of St. Peter. And it's believed that you see inside that bronze throne that the actual chair that Peter sat on is contained inside the bronze sculpture. And they've done some test drillings even, and they've found out, yes, there is a wooden chair inside there. So maybe it is the actual chair that St. Peter sat on. And Bernini created all around this incredible mystical view of all the angels in the putti and the Holy Spirit. The wingspan is about 10 feet of the dove. Yeah. The whole thing is just beyond belief. It's so huge. And that's natural sunlight that's coming in. And we have all these gold puttis, this entire melange of the gold rays of the sun, all symbolizing heaven, of course. Bernini also did this funeral monument to Pope Urban VIII on the right side. So again, who do you think this would be by? My favorite, Bernini. And this is about the final work he ever did. It's the tomb to Pope Alexander VII. And Bernini knew that his own days were numbered when he was creating this, and he worked very hard to do most of it himself, but his students and his assistants had to help out to get the whole thing finished. And you can see this skeleton holding up the sands of time. Time is running out for all of us, right? This is the universal message of the church. And over here we've got the world. Beautiful globe. So again, it's heaven and earth all brought together in this funerary monument. Another example of the mosaics, it looks just like a painting, but really it's all stone mosaic. And this is the side chapels. There's something like 50 chapels inside St. Peter's altogether. And very often they'll have Mass here. Probably later today, I suspect, they're going to have Mass right up here.
Miserere nostri nobis,